So,
location.
sure.
To say, you know, like,
That's true. It's been a while.
Because I know a lot of
I'm
our
hearing
pastors
how are they
I'm doing
acting
Saturday.
I'm thinking about the
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second Thiel Forum of the Spring 2023 semester. Thank you for being here with us today as we welcome Dr. Jared Johnson and Dr. Lana Kulik. Our first presenter, Dr. Johnson, has been at Thiel since 2012, and since that time has distinguished himself with his service as the chair of the English department, our faculty marshal, on numerous committees, and in keeping with the presentation he will deliver today, with his recognition at Thursday's Founders Day celebration as a distinguished faculty scholar. As professor of English, he recently undertook a sabbatical from which he conducted research and published Villains on the High Seas in the collection called The Performativity of Village by Palgrave Publishers, and Westworld's New Prospero and His Island of Caliban in selected papers of the Ohio Valley Shakespeare Conference. His presentation is titled Shakespeare, Pirates, and Robots, The Sabbatical Reflection. I am proud to present my departmental colleague, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you for that introduction. So yeah, my talk is entitled Shakespeare, Pirates, and Robots, Sabbatical Reflection. I think it's important when you have some time to devote to scholarship and get away from the classroom, that reflection is an important thing to do. So obviously when you have a title that has three diverse things that seemingly have nothing to do with one another, an automatic place to go might be the internet. And so what I did was I looked at computer-generated art and typed in as keywords Shakespeare, pirates, robots. And the last one, the one on the far, it would be your right, I typed in Westworld 2 to see what I could come up with. And you have like a Spock-looking Shakespeare hybrid robot guy. I have no idea. That it seems like the pirate in the middle image has too many limbs, too many fake appendages. I don't understand how that works, but I think Sean McConnor is still safe being an artist, and AI hasn't quite caught up with him yet. So over the course of my sabbatical, I was able to do two publications. So the first is Villains of the High Seas. And in this work, I looked at three different plays that represented piracy in the early modern world. And the second one is called Hell is Empty and All the Devils Are Here, which is a quote from the Tempest, Westworld's New Prospero and His Island of Calibans, His Isle of Calibans. And then along with this, I did one presentation, which is the Ohio Valley Shakespeare Conference. And this was in Toledo, Ohio, Owens Community College. And yeah, the conference became the bridge to the publication. So I presented at the conference, and then the conference took selections. You applied for it, and if they selected you, you got published. And this is currently under review. I haven't received my page proofs yet, but I recently made edits to the manuscript, and just need to look at those and make any final adjustments to it. So I wanted to, in a talk that deals with scholarship, I wanted to basically underline what my scholarship philosophy is, or philosophy of research is. And so one of the things that I believe firmly is that scholarship must be public. And public can mean any number of things, but I like to think of it as either a presentation, a publication in the form of an academic journal or book, or even something, some type of like lay publication, just so long as it gets out there. It doesn't mean no good to do research and to just sort of like absorb information, write something, and then keep it to myself. It has to get out there. The other thing is that scholarship is evolving, and so in addition to traditional print publications, we also have online publications, which the Ohio Valley Shakespeare Conference selected papers consists of. So scholarship should be evolving. And then finally, scholarship and teaching. This is the most important thing. Scholarship and teaching have to be organically interconnected so that any time I spend doing research I need to find some way to apply it to the classroom and get something out of the classroom experience. So I like to connect those two. So while on sabbatical, I was in the weeds a little bit with my Westworld writing, and I saw a call for papers come up for this edition, this book called Performativity of Villainy and Evil in Anglophone Literature and Media. And I thought, this looks really interesting. I like evil. Maybe I could do something that deals with evil. And when I went through and I looked at like the various types of articles it was looking for, it said early modern world excluding Shakespeare, because they apparently had lined up all their Shakespeare scholars. And little old me, as a Shakespeare scholar, thought, what do I do? But I've studied other authors during the period. Like, although I think of Shakespeare as my touchstone, my anchor, the thing that anchors me to scholarship. I'm flexible. I can do things. So I became the resident expert on like 3 sort of obscure playwrights who wrote about piracy. If you look at this edition, this is the table of contents. It's wide-ranging. There are tons of things that this edition covers. So like there's on the far right for you, there's an article on the Joker in one of the Batman films. There's an article about American Psycho. So like it's wide-spanning. You have in column 2, I think you have the various Shakespeare scholars that have already laid claim to their articles, and I'm on the far left, writing about William de Bourne's Christian Turned Turk. So like it's wide spanning. There's plenty of room for lots of scholars to be included under this umbrella of villainy. It's a huge topic. And so I ended up writing an article called Villains of the High Seas. And the thesis goes something like George Peele's The Battle of Alcazar, the anonymously authored Captain Thomas Stukely, and William de Bourne's A Christian Turned Turk portray the performance of villainy through a new vice that's in contrast to, say, a vice figure like a Mephistopheles or one of the sort of medieval vice figures. One that tempts their Christian sailors to renounce their faith, convert to Islam, and live a pirate's life. And I remember writing this in my abstract before I had written the actual paper, and thinking it's got a nice catchy ring to it. I sort of liked the thesis statement and stuck with it. But the article itself deals with this guy who is rumored to be a bastard, an illegitimate son of, and also a bastard, an illegitimate son of Henry VIII. So this is Thomas Stukely, and he appears in 2 plays. That's not really the heart of my argument. The heart of the argument is to look at A Christian Turned Turk, which is this guy dealing with John Ward, who converts to Islam and is known as Yusuf Ray. And he appears in a number of pamphlets. You see this anonymous news from the sea. So it's like the pamphlet literature is sort of like gossip magazines, the National Enquirer of the early modern world. So these stories circulate about piracy, and then a playwright, of course, who needs new material, picks it up and dramatizes it, and here we have Captain John Ward. So I wanted to just give you an excerpt from the article itself, because I love academic scholarly prose. If I could speak in academic scholarly prose all the time, I would do it. But as it stands, I just speak normal English. But this is me in my ideal world. So the mythology surrounding Stukely in the 2 plays that we had looked at before, that appeared in the 1590s, that of the hubristically defiant pirate whose karmic insubordination eventually leads to his eventual murder by his own men in Peele's play, and the perpetual and incurable prodigal in the anonymous Captain Stukely becomes extended, transferred, and Islamicized after the turn of the century as Captain John Ward. Stukely's arrival on the English pop cultural scene in the mid-50s burned into the minds of playgoers the image of an intractable bad boy who protested the gravity of the inextricably linked forces of church and state through the buoyancy of his own will. So in other words, we're moving away from one pirate figure into another pirate figure, and that is, of course, Ward. De Born's A Christian Turned Turk, one of the two extant plays, dramatizes the life of the most notorious pirate of the Tudor-Stuart era in England, Captain John Ward. De Born was a minor playwright, born in 1580. He was a near contemporary of Shakespeare and died in 1628, 12 years after Shakespeare. And he wrote this play the primary purpose of it is to make money, and this has a link to his biography. De Born's history as a debtor who was bound to his theatrical master Henslowe no doubt informs his dramatic representation of power dynamics. In seeking to define the relationship between playwright and theater company, Richard Halpern, a scholar, uses the historical example of De Born's dealings with Henslowe to suggest that regular Renaissance playwrights like De Born and Marlowe, that is, playwrights who don't have the luxury of owning stock in their own company, entered into a kind of Faustian bind vis-a-vis the theater managers or impresarios. Specifically, Halpern said this: having signed a contract with Henslowe and become financially dependent on him, De Born pledges his faith in Christianity against his obligations to a worldly master, wishing that God may desert him if he proves false to Henslowe. So, in his own personal life, he becomes sort of like indebted, enslaved even, to Henslowe to write this play. For Halpern, Henslowe becomes a device figure in his own economic morality play, starring Christopher Marlowe and co-starring Robert De Born as tragic protagonists. In De Born's A Christian Turned Turk, the vice is not constrained to a single character, it's the setting in general. I wanted to give a little bit of a taste of what the play, how the play maneuvers through piracy as a particularly Islamic threat. And so one of the things that it does is it features a seduction scene with Ward, a Christian, who is defected to the Islamic world, and his love interest, whose name is Boeda. And he says, at one point in the play, Ward's self-justification of his own conversion, so he converts to Islam, smacks of Faustus as Ward elevates earthly gifts above that of the divine. So the day leaves, the world chased Boeda, nothing can make him miserable enjoys thee. What is it I lose this by my change, my country? Already 'tis to me impossible. My name is scandaled. What is one island compared to the Eastern monarchy? Besides, they are slaves, stand subject unto shame. One good I enjoy outweighs all ills whatever can be objected. To some my happiness, that God on earth, to whom all men stand bare, gold that doth usher greatness lackeys me. I have more than I can spend. I'd rather lead on slaves than be commanded by the power of kings. Beauty, command, and riches. These are the three the world pursues, and these follow me. So he's justifying his conversion, is sort of embodied through Boeda, by thinking of these earthly riches that he gains by doing that. At the end of the play, though, everybody turns on poor Captain Ward. De Born's Ward expresses essentially the same sentiment as that of Marlowe's Faustus in this passage that I just looked at. The materialist fantasy of earthly pleasure through sex, power, and wealth. Boeda feigns being seriously wounded during a heated quarrel with her husband, which is interesting. And the governor sentences Ward to receive all tortures that man ever knew. In Ward's dying speech, he characterizes the Muslim citizens of Tunis as slaves of Muhammad. This turn of phrase is both an inversion of the Christian ideal of serving Christ and a conflation of Islam's prophecy and deity. In his final moments on stage, Ward curses his former lifestyle and warns of the spiritual dangers of a pirate's life, and says, all you that live by theft and piracies, that sell your lives and souls to purchase graves, that die to hell and live far worse than slaves, let dying Ward tell you that heaven is just, and that despair attends on blood and lust. Probably with a more piratical accent than that was. So he dies. Okay, so I wanted to switch a little bit for the sake of time and to look at this other work, this other project that I've been working on, which is the Westworld paper. And I presented this, like I said, at the Ohio Valley Shakespeare Conference Sean was kind enough to accompany me and deliver a paper as well, so I can't do anything alone apparently. So, but the Ohio Valley Shakespeare Conference was a delight and fun and a wonderful community to sort of like interact and to show your work off. So I was looking at Westworld, and one of the things that struck me about this show, especially the first season, was that I thought it was modeled somehow modeled on The Tempest. I saw lots of similarities between this show and some of Shakespeare's dramas. There you have Anthony Hopkins looking very out of place in a Western setting with his pocket watch and so forth. So he even as a sort of like Wild Wild West cosplayer, he looks out of place. But I'll just give you an excerpt from this and then move into a clip from it and some analysis. So I begin. Lisa Joy has cited Prospero as her source of inspiration in writing the character of Robert Ford, whom you see here, the technological mastermind responsible for the Wild West theme park for which the series is named. Prospero plays a dual role in the play, as indicated by his costume. His entrance in 1-2 in his magic cloak announces his status as magician, but by the play's end, Prospero's discasing of his former costume and his donning of his hat and rapier that he commanded Ariel to fetch instantiates his former status as Duke, as I was sometime Milan. Paul Brown argues that Prospero's costume change registers his reclamation of civil power, as his hat and rapier function as twin markers of the governor. The undoffed hat signifying a high status in a deferent society, the rapier signifying his aristocratic right to wield such a weapon. In this way, Prospero is both sorcerer and governor, a position akin to the role that Robert Ford plays as the park director of Delos Destinations within the Westworld narrative. Indeed, in episode 2, Ford confides to his programmer, Bernard Lowe, the Ariel to his Prospero, "We practice witchcraft, we speak the right words, then we create life out of chaos." While there would seem to be few similarities between the exiled Milanese duke turned sorcerer from Shakespeare and Westworld's co-founder and park director, Prospero and Ford share a likeness in temperament, purpose, language, and to some degree situation that link not just the two characters, but the two works and worlds in their respective storylines. In what follows, I wish to highlight two key scenes of the Shakespearean transformations from the climactic finale of Westworld, season 1, vis-a-vis The Tempest. The first scene from Westworld that strongly echoes The Tempest is Dr. Ford's final conversation with his lead programmer, Bernard. Episode 10, spoiler alert, has anybody seen Westworld? Go watch it. You won't remember this. It'll be fine. Episode 10 showcases the season's big reveal that finally makes sense of what fans had been suspecting all along, and they had been. They followed it on Reddit. The seemingly linear narrative of the show is in actuality the juxtaposition of two different timelines separated by 30 years. It is in this episode that Ford says his final goodbye to Bernard. As Bernard and Ford talk in the White Church in Escalante right before Ford will give his resignation speech, Bernard confronts his boss about the treatment of the hosts. Hosts mean, that word means robots, as contrasted to humans. Here Bernard finally and defiantly asserts that he and the hosts will one day find freedom of Ford's control. To Bernard and for audiences, Ford's response seems heartfelt, but at the same time unsatisfying. Ford claims that Bernard is ultimately responsible for inserting the reveries or ability to remember the past into the host software update. Here Ford does not free Bernard. That is, frankly, beyond his power, as the company's board retains the intellectual property of the hosts, though he is the inventor. Instead, he empowers Bernard with the knowledge that suffering is the key to unlocking his consciousness and hence his freedom. Ford's final exchange with Bernard is a kind of Shakespearean transformation, which is the theme of the conference, that gives real weight and consequences to the unequal and unjust power dynamics that Shakespeare glosses over in The Tempest. No doubt Ford appears at times as tyrannical and cruel to the hosts, as Prospero is to those over which he has power. Unlike Dr. Ford, though, Prospero's power over Ariel is absolute. He alone is capable of releasing his servant from captivity. At the end of the play, Prospero says, "Then to the elements, be free and fare thee well." So there's a major difference. It's a Shakespearean transformation that has this master-servant dynamic and this eventual freeing in both works. The second scene, though, is even more, draws even a finer point to the similarities between the two works. The second scene from Westworld Season 1, from the Westworld Season 1 finale that echoes The Tempest directly, is during Ford's resignation speech. After leaving Bernard in the White Church, Ford appears before a crowd of Delos board members and upper management as a team of hosts cater the event and provide entertainment. Ford begins his address. Oh. That's fine. I can ventriloquize Anthony Hopkins. He says, Ford says, "Good evening. Since I was a child, I always loved a good story. I believe that stories helped us to ennoble ourselves, to fix what was broken in us, and to help us become the people we dreamed of being, lies that told a deeper truth. I always thought I could play some small part in the grand tradition." Ford's characterization of storytelling as lies that tell a deeper truth recalls the metatextual moments in The Tempest in which Prospero likens his magic within the world of the play to the mimetic power of the theater to conjure meaning outside of it. Prospero speaks to the three spirits he summoned to celebrate the wedding of Miranda and Ferdinand, Juno, Ceres, and Iris, as actors who, quote, "were all spirits and all melted into air, into thin air." Prospero describes the features of the pageant and, by extension, the world-building elements that frame the stories created on the stage as ephemeral. And like the basic fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, ye all which it inherit shall dissolve, and, like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. Paul Brown, again, reads Prospero's Stuff of Dreams speech as a commentary of the power of things to designate meaning through representation. The speech, for Brown, inaugurates the dispelling of the mask and illuminates the illusory nature of all representation, even of the world itself. Brown places this dynamic in tension with Prospero's earlier insistence on his narrative being taken as real and powerful, which becomes contradicted in the monologue as Prospero's narrative is collapsed along with everything else into the stuff of dreams. The imaginary representational world, created within the time and space of a theatrical performance, is, to borrow Dr. Ford's terminology, a lie, but a lie that unfolds on the stage to tell a deeper truth. Westworld transforms Shakespeare into something intangible, ethereal, and perhaps even magical. This is most apparent in the show's overt nods to The Tempest. In his epilogue, Prospero makes a final surrender to the audience, imploring them, "But release me from my bands with the help of your good hands." Prospero, who had occupied a position of power throughout the play, now performs a final act of obeisance to the audience, literally begging them for applause while he releases them from the theater. Like Prospero's epilogue, which has been interpreted as Shakespeare's final address to his audiences, Ford informs his gathered guests that, "I'm sad to say, this will be my last story." When Ford tells his audience there will be a killing, this time by choice, he is speaking broadly about a new plot line within the game. At the same time, though, he's forecasting his own death that will come at the hands of the self-aware Dolores, the show's robot protagonist. As the gun-wielding Dolores creeps up behind him, Ford tells an anecdote that recalls the use of magic in The Tempest. Ford says, "An old friend once told me something that gave me comfort, something he had read. He said that Mozart, Beethoven, and Chopin never died, they simply became music. So I hope you'll enjoy this last piece very much." As Ford speaks of music, an instrumental version of Radiohead's Exit Music for a Film plays in the background. The song was written for the 1996 Baz Luhrmann film, Romeo plus Juliet, and captures a young couple's escape from an overbearing father. The inclusion of this song to accompany Ford's speech underlines the theme of rebellion against oppression, a theme that becomes echoed in the subsequent robot rebellion against their human captors. So that was the end of that particular article. But let's talk about, just briefly, how scholarship and teaching interrelate with one another. So what I got out of this experience was I designed a class called Topics in Drama, Staging Piracy in Renaissance Drama in the spring of 2022, which was successful in that I did it. And I also incorporated Westworld into my science fiction and fantasy class that I'm currently teaching. At the Spring 2022 Thiel College Scholarship and Arts Symposium, 2 of my students from the piracy class presented. So Tess Cadman presented Men Against Women, a study of gender roles through piracy in early modern dramas. And Janelle Moudry published That's Nobody's Business But the Turks, or Is It? An examination of Jacobean drama as a tool to promote English imperialism. What's on the horizon? In terms of scholarship, I recently taught a class called Satanic Panic, and in it I explored connections between early modern witch crazes and the modern day rise of white Christian nationalism in English, in the English capstone. I didn't tell the students that the class was going to draw parallels between what happened in the early modern world and what has happened recently through white Christian nationalism and the craze that it is. But the final assignment asked them something to that effect, and connections were made. And finally, I encouraged students from that class to present at the upcoming Scholarship and Arts Symposium. So one more thing. After teaching the piracy class, I had a student who took my world literature class, and she incorporated a footnote to reference that